The Subaru Outback has temporary leverage. It was once the more expensive, borderline premium two-row offering in the Subaru lineup. However, for 2025, the Forester chased refinement and in the process became a little more expensive than the lifted wagon. So, is it worth it? On the surface, the Forester had an epiphany. It can place more effort into being premium without losing its rugged edge. It's been dressed up on the outside. The interior sees some different textures and accenting. There's also improved ergonomics, and it's a touch more quiet on the highway, yet the ground clearance is high. The all-wheel drive is arguably best in class, and it retains the mother's purse level of practicality, absurdly good visibility, and a more traditional SUV driving position, whereas in the Outback, you feel more like you're sitting in it than on top of it. It's also still much longer than the Forester, but is it more upscale? Yeah, which kind of surprises me. With the price delta gone, I was thinking this would be more of a pick your style kind of video. Do you want the more distinct granola wagon, or do you want the more mainstream dog dad approach? Once we start diving into the nuances, things become a little muddy. Feature-wise, each comes with steering responsive LED headlights. Most Foresters will come with fog lights, but all Outbacks will have them, and they have these really cool deployable crossbars that swing out when you need them and swing back when you don't need them, so that way there's a little less wind noise on the highway. The Forester gets a leg up though, as it's the only one here to offer a true 360 view camera and not just one up front. I'd expect a 2025 Forester Wilderness to come soon, but for now, if you want over 9 inches of ground clearance, more available underbody protection, mild all-terrain tires, and a more aggressive final drive ratio, the Outback is the only one to answer the call. Despite a longer front overhang for 2025, the Forester's shorter dimensions here lend it an angle advantage when off-road. Style-wise, the Forester might vaguely resemble your disorderly uncle's carriage on the weekends, but I think it looks a little more cohesive, and I actually prefer it over the Outback sheet metal in the sharp sport guise. Let me know your thoughts. If you're a Subaru fan, chances are you're more of a function over form type. In that realm, these are pretty evenly matched. The Forester has a few more inches of height in the cargo area. The Outback has a few more inches in length. It also comes standard with seat releases, something you have to pay extra for with the Forester. Fold the seats down in either, and someone 6 feet tall can sleep in the back. You also have a compact spare tire in each, but the Outback will give you a full-sizer in the Onyx XT and Wilderness. Briefly, I'd like to thank the folks over at Royal on the Eastside in Bloomington, Indiana, for letting me test drive a few Foresters and Outbacks to make this video possible. Royal East is comprised of a knowledgeable staff, and they've been serving the community for over 50 years. Check them out. On the inside, for 2025, the amenities between the two are similar. Throw away your savings and you can get ventilated front seats, heated rear seats, and a driver focus monitor that watches your face while you're driving, but also recognizes who's driving and can adjust to your memory settings accordingly. And most configurations of Forester and Outback will come with niceties like heated front seats, a leather-wrapped steering wheel, and lumbar adjustment too. And unfortunately, both have the same giant touchscreen or dual monitor setup at the center of the cabin. Now, Subaru did have the wits to leave a few cheap-feeling buttons and dials for inputs you might want to adjust quickly. The UI is also simple. Wireless CarPlay comes on most, but the screen quality and response time feel far behind the times at this point. And that's exaggerated by the size. Tech has never really been a Subaru stronghold. And it's frustrating because we all have our weak points, but usually we also have the self-awareness to try to conceal them. There's a reason this channel is about cars and not escaping social anxiety or dancing. And if you like to groove, avoid the bass trim of either because you'll only have 4 speakers, which is just plain silly at over 30 grand. The 6-speaker stereo is fine, but the Harman Kardon unit with the subwoofer makes a big difference with bass and high volume clarity. The added insulation of the Outback means I think it sounds a little better there than here, but there are a few other things that give this an advantage over the Outback for some folks. Visibility and airy vibes are the biggest ones that I can think of. It feels like I have more wiggle room, and it's extremely easy to see out of. It's also laden with durable materials that feel easy to clean. The vinyls, the plastics, the cloth on the premium trim feel tough. They even give it a black headliner as standard to show less scuffs. There are some soft touch points too, a little more as you step up in trims, but in any outfit, the Forester is never posh. They use that plastic and vinyl in basically every area, and in some it really does look cheap. And I also do wish the rest points had a little more cushioning. Another difference again is the seating position. It's more upright here, and not as good for lounging, but it is easier to get in and out of, and for 25, thigh support was improved. And I find these seats to be pretty well shaped, soft, and agreeable. Moving into the back at 6'3", even with the pano roof eating into my headroom, I fit with some space left to go for my legs. Skip the base and you'll have console vents with either. The Outback has the same legroom, but most will have more headroom, as you can only get a much smaller sunroof. Up front, the Forester might be more rugged, but this is definitely more plush. There's softer rest points and materials, comfortable seats with extendable thigh cushions and more firm bottoms. While I might call it a draw between the seats, I do like the more stretched out driving position of the Outback. At 6'3", this feels right, except it is more narrow. The smaller windows also make this feel a little bit more tight. And the infotainment system, while it is very similar when it comes to response time and whatnot, the angle is slightly different, and I think that makes it more easily washed out by sunlight, so the Forester does have an advantage on that front. That aside, if you ask me which one felt like it carried the higher price tag, my answer is the Outback. But does that change on the road? For better or worse, the Subaru Forester sets the benchmark for the small crossover driving experience. Under the hood is a slightly revised version of Subaru's tried and true 2.5-liter naturally aspirated Boxer 4. There was an insignificant drop in power and increase in torque, which I suppose is a small step in the right direction, but what you'll notice more is the increased spread in gear ratios from the standard continuously variable transmission. This allows for a little bit more seamless performance at low speeds. I haven't really noticed a difference in pep. Either way you go, 0 to 60 is coming up in like the high 8-second range in an ideal scenario. Though if you're wondering, these ratios now just match what you'll find in the Outback, and the final drive is still less aggressive. Anyway, this is smooth, it reacts quickly, especially if you put it in its sport mode, and I think for most people, the passing power here is acceptable. If you have high demands or high elevation, you might want to stick to the Outback Turbo for now. There is a hybrid on the way that should improve things, but I don't see it becoming the hot rod that the Outback is. That electrified variant should trace its roots to a Toyota system, so expect exceptional fuel economy, something the 2.5-liter Forester and Outback already do well. A bigger difference is felt in the Forester when you start turning it. So the steering utilizes a dual pinion rack, which essentially means there's less in between your hands in the road, and the results speak for themselves. Not that there's a lot of feedback here, it's mostly numb, but there's definitely less vagueness on center. It feels a little bit more defined. And this increased precision is complemented by a quick steering ratio too. It feels relatively agile. Now the center of gravity is lowered by the Boxer 4-cylinder engine, but the suspension is soft. Start hustling it and body roll reveals itself like a dog wanting a belly rub. The sport trim will make it a little bit more firm. The difference is slight, but it doesn't come at the cost of any comfort. So I would recommend that, but either way you go, you have oodles of confidence. Through imperfect corners, the suspension soaks up the road and prevents the rear end from shifting around, though it does waft over undulations with less poise than some competitors from Honda and Mazda. This is extremely approachable to drive, with its light, fairly natural steering and great view outward, and on a torn up back road, it's also very forgiving. Larger potholes make their way into the cabin, but not in a jarring motion whatsoever, and small to medium-sized imperfections are dealt with quickly and barely make their way to your spine. This feels very similar to how it used to, and that's not a bad thing. It is arguably the most forgiving in its class. And cruising at 65 miles per hour, wind noise seems to be down over the previous Forester, but road noise is still prevalent, and as a result, it's about a decibel quieter. But now I want to see if the Forester has finally become as serene as the Outback. Up at 65 miles per hour, we're getting about 64 4 decibels, 1 or 2 quieter than the Forester. And to my ears, it is noticeable. Maybe it's because there's less glass, but it just seems like both wind and road noise are taken down one small level. Subaru's outdoorsy wagon has been a favorite of mine for tackling gnarly roads and long highways alike. Under the hood, you'll find a now dated version of Subaru's 2.5-liter naturally aspirated Boxer 4. But with the Outback, you can also get a 2.4-liter turbocharged Boxer 4. This will make 260 horsepower and 277 pound-feet of torque, which is enough to alarm your passengers and stock WRX owners. This makes the Outback feel relaxed in any sort of passing situation. It also helps it tow up to 3,500 pounds, more than any Forester. Without forced induction, this accelerates very similarly to the Subaru Forester, which means again you have an agreeable yet unenthusiastic continuously variable transmission, though this time it actually doesn't have any sort of sport mode. You just have the manual mode, so you can fake gear changes, I guess. Helpful for engine braking in mountains, not a whole lot else. Plant the throttle and it'll sing the Weed Whacker chorus, but it does try to conceal its identity a little bit. Now, I'm happy that Subaru gives you options with the powertrain here. However, the turbo and the CVT don't work super well together. Each one has their own little bit of lag, and when you combine them both together, it becomes even more noticeable. Honestly, with a low power output, I think the CVT is the right move, but as far-fetched as it is, I do hope Subaru comes up with some sort of 8-speed automatic for those forced induction models. With the Forester and Outback, you will have a debatably top-of-class full-time all-wheel drive system as standard. What I like about it is that it uses equal-length drive shafts. It feels very balanced in low traction scenarios, no torque steer whatsoever, and it's not hesitant at all to send power to the back. Plus, each will have standard X mode, which among other things uses the brakes to stop spinning wheels and send power to the side with more traction. It's capable on its own, but available on the Forester and Outback is a separate deep snow and mud configuration, which furthers the capability, and that functionality pairs up really nicely to the wilderness grades. If you want most of the capability of a true off-roader, but also want crossover driving characteristics, Subaru has you covered pretty well. Now, having driven the wilderness trim, you will get a touch more tire noise, but the difference is honestly pretty subtle. Whether you live off the beaten path or drive on beaten city streets, the Outback should prove to be a good investment. It is still a little bit more forgiving and unbothered by whatever the road surface is. While the Forester takes everything well, this is even less choppy than that over breaks in the pavement, and this doesn't come at the cost of way more body roll. You might notice that it's sprung a little bit more toward comfort when you start pulling up to higher speeds, but it's still planted, and the difference in steering is especially obvious when you drive them back to back. This is heavier, and it also has less life. You just have like no sense of what's going on close to center, and from there it doesn't build up a whole lot as you're going through corners. I also think it makes the Outback feel slightly more flat-footed than the Forester. Obviously, you're doing something wrong if you're buying a Subaru Outback to get your heart going, but I'd really appreciate just that little bit of communication to make it feel as predictable as what you would get with the Forester. Is this a big deal for most people in this segment? Maybe not. Another subtle difference here, unless you go with the touring trim, you're gonna have Subaru's slightly older eyesight system. While not awful, the lane centering is not great, and either one of these will nag you, but at least adaptive cruise is standard. Blind spot monitoring will come on most. If those aren't enough to keep you from trouble, the Outback performed well in crash tests until its latest encounter with the updated front evaluation, and the new Forester has yet to receive a rating. Because these share the same basic powertrain structure and tech, I'd expect reliability to be pretty similar. While some of it might be minor, Subaru has revised every single part of the Forester, so time is going to have to tell. But if we look into the past of both the Outback and the Forester, they shared common issues like easily cracking windshields, draining batteries, and buggy infotainment and electronics. Major powertrain problems were rare for both, but not entirely unheard of. Early in the previous Forester and current Outback generations, some folks had transmission problems, and most of those complaints came from turbo Outback owners. which had a recall for the PCM that should have fixed most of the issues people were having. Another common problem that's been popping up more and more is failing thermo control valves on the 2.5 liter. Subaru updated the part for 2022. Some people aren't convinced that that's going to fix the issue entirely, but for the 2025 Forester, Subaru actually got rid of that and switched back to a conventional thermostat, which is what shouldn't have left in the first place. Historically, first model year cars have more problems, but I'd feel comfortable recommending either of these to people that highly prioritize reliability, especially in 2.5 liter form. Just remember to work in fuel induction cleaning and transmission fluid swaps, and I don't see most people having serious issues with either. The Forester and Outback are in a liminal space, and this awkward year in between redesigns favors the Outback in more ways. It's a little cheaper. It's a little more quiet. The interior is more plush. There's more configurations. The roof rails are more cool. But disregarding the price, I do think the Forester has moved in the right direction. The steering is less simulation-esque. There's a little less wind noise than before. The transmission is as smooth as the Outback's, and its more tidy footprint, view outward, rugged materials, and tall cargo hold make it more well-rounded. That's enough to give the Forester its own convincing argument. If versatility and being easy to drive are the things most important to you, it wins. However, I think the loss of the price difference makes the Outback the car that stands out more to me, and the car that ever so slightly wins as my broad recommendation. It feels more expensive for less money, and the wagon approach is more unique to begin with. I expect this to be redesigned next year, and I also expect a considerably higher price to accompany that. This would strengthen the Forester's proposition in the lineup, and it would also allow the Outback to chase more substantial upgrades. Maybe it takes on a little bit more width. Maybe it comes standard with a hybrid. Maybe it will fully revamp the infotainment, add even more insulation, a different transmission. Okay, that one I'm just dreaming. Subaru's not doing that. But who knows? I just hope for our budget's sake they don't get too carried away with the upgrades. There are a lot of different paths that Subaru could go down in the future, but for now, the Outback isn't just hanging around, it's thriving. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, then please leave a like to help me take on the maniacal YouTube algorithm. Subscribe and hit the notification bell for more fun, detailed car content without fluff. Consider becoming a member for an additional podcast and to help me take on larger projects. I'll catch you in the next one.